Okay, I'm finally going to get around to trying to do another episode of Grandma Ginny's Storytime. I know it's been a while. Anyway, this is the first part from my baby grandson. It's a story from Disney Frozen called Summer Bliss. Looks pretty happy. Okay. The bees will be buzzing. The sun will be bright. There we go. The boats will be floating. The water's just right. See, the boats are over here, and the snowman is in the water. The buds will be blooming. Warm breezes will blow. And he's running along, looking really happy. Oh, I just can't wait to be summer snow. I've never seen summer snow, but I guess it looks a lot like sand. Wet sand, probably. Okay, that's the end of this little story from Disney. And I'm going to go ahead to the second chapter of The League of Seven by Alan Grantz, illustrated by Brett Helquist. I have a mark in here. Okay, Chapter 2. Mr. Rivets climbed aboard the SS Seven Seas and closed the hatch just as the Septemberist Council emerged from the arch at the top of the steps. Archie could see their smiling faces from the cockpit of the submersible. My little dog is getting jealous, so I'm going to pick her up and put her on my lap. Maybe that'll be okay. She's still being jealous. Okay. Let's go, Mr. Hull, he told the machine man at the controls. Hurry. Ready a submersible for departure is a strict and complicated procedure, sir. To rush the process would endanger you and the other occupants. Archie watched and smiled. The Septemberist Council walked down the steps toward them at the same maddeningly slow pace they had come at him in the council chambers. Just walking after him was scarier than if they had chased him at a run. It was like they knew they were going to get him and didn't have to hurry. Don't you have any kind of emergency override or anything? Archie asked Mr. Hull. Master Archie, Mr. Rivets said, joining them in the small cockpit. What's wrong with Mr. and Mrs. Dent? The same thing that's going to be wrong with me if we don't get out of here, Archie said. The Septemberist Council was at the bottom of the steps. Archie couldn't hear them through the thick glass of the bubble windows, but he could see their mouths moving. They were probably still telling him there was something in the basement they wanted him to see. Mr. Hull kept flipping switches and turning dials, but they weren't going anywhere. The council would be on top of them any second. Archie scanned the console and recognized the switch that controlled the mooring clamps. He knew he wasn't supposed to, but slag it. They had to get out of here now. Archie flipped the switch. Ka-chunk! The submersible let go of the dock and bobbed on the water. Sir, Mr. Hull protested, but Archie wasn't finished. He flipped the switch to release the ship's ballast, and the SS Seven Seas rocked as it burbled and sank beneath the water's surface. Archie let go the breath he didn't know he'd been holding as they left the Septemberist Council smiling on the dock. Sir, Mr. Hull said, struggling to make up for all the steps Archie had skipped, this is highly unsafe. Archie staggered as the submersible hit the rocky bottom of the cavern, but Mr. Hall soon had them to rights. "You are not a licensed submersible operator. You are not allowed to manipulate the controls," Mr. Hull told him. "I'm afraid I must ask you to leave the cockpit at once." "In a minute," Archie told him. He reached around Mr. Rivets, took a long look at his parents in the passenger's compartment, sitting there with the same empty smiles on their faces as before, and slid the cockpit door closed. "Mr. Rivets, Mom and Dad, they've got bug things on their necks." Archie told the tick-tock what he'd seen and how the Septemberists Council had acted when he'd run in and told them about the mangle spawn. "Do you think they have those bugs on them too?" he added. "I think it highly probable," Mr. Rivets said. "But what are they doing to them? The bugs, I mean." Archie told Mr. Rivets, clockworks ticking as the machine man thought. "Oh, I'm sorry." Archie heard Mr. Rivets' clockworks ticking as the machine man thought. "The only similar experience I've had was in service to your great-great-grandmother, Willoughby Dent, when we countered a mangle spawn in the forest of what was then known as the Massachusetts colony the year the darkness fell." Archie blinked. He sometimes forgot just how old Mr. Rivets was and how many Dents he'd served, all of whom had been Septemberists. Mr. Rivets was a walking, talking Septemberist Society archive. In that circumstance, the mangle spawn had the ability to control the behavior of human beings by laying eggs in their stomachs. Mr. Rivets said, "Rather a messy business." "Ugh," Archie said. "So those bugs are controlling them?" "The mangle spawn in the catacombs would be the central brain, I would think," Mr. Rivets said, "communicating telepathically through the creatures on your parents." "Telling them to do what?" "That I could not say, sir. We have to try to snap them out of it," Archie said. "No, Mrs. Dent," screamed at last, making Archie jump again. She sobbed as she screamed, a sound that wrenched Archie's heart right out of his chest. "No, can't be here. Have to run, Archie. Don't let them." The thing was almost all the way out of Mrs. Dent's neck when Mr. Dent reached around Mr. Rivets' small brass flap on his back and switched him off. The tension immediately released from the springs inside of Mr. Rivets, and the machine man went limp. His hand released the bug, and his arms and head lolled uselessly. "Mom, no, Mom," Archie cried. Mrs. Dent slumped forward on the bench, and Archie caught her in his arms. He could hear the bug slurping back into her neck. Mrs. Dent grabbed him by the lapels of his jacket and, with desperate strength, "Archie, 1, 2, buckle my shoe, remember. 1, 2. She suddenly stopped and stood, letting go of his jacket. The pain was gone from her face, replaced by a tear-stained smile and a blank stare, sort of like this. Come back, please," Archie said, but she was gone. The thing was back in her neck, its tail buried deep inside her again. Pulling it out had hurt her badly, but it could be done. If Mr. Rivets could pull out both bugs at the same time, they couldn't stop it. But as soon as Archie had thought, his father stood and moved to the bench on the other side of the small compartment. It wasn't fair, but it was No, it wasn't far, but it was far enough that Mr. Rivets couldn't reach them both. They could do it if Archie pulled one of them out, but he didn't know if he was strong enough, physically or mentally. Archie switched Mr. Rivets back on. The machine man whirred and straightened. He peered back and forth at Mr. and Mrs. Dent and then at Archie. "I take it we were unsuccessful," he said. "Yeah," Archie said, drying his eyes. "We're slagged." The submersible arrived back at the Hudson River submarine landing, and Archie's parents stood up to leave. "Mr. Rivets, what do we do?" Archie asked. He was 12 years old. Wherever they went, he went. "I know they're being controlled by that thing, but they're my parents." "And my masters," Mr. Rivets said. "I think all we can do is follow them, try to discern what plan the Muggle spawn has in mind for them, and do our best to prevent it." "How?" Archie wondered. But he didn't say it. His parents were already climbing out onto the busy sub-landing docks. He and Mr. Rivets had to hurry if he didn't want to lose them. As they made their way through the busy terminus, Archie spied an Algonquin in a new Rome policeman's uniform. He tugged at Mr. Rivets' brass arm. "We could go to the police." "And tell them what?" Mr. Rivets said. "That your parents are being controlled by a monster in the catacombs beneath the headquarters of a secret society that they have never heard of?" Mr. Rivets was right. The police would think he was a blinking flag. And they couldn't go to the September Society. They were under the same spell. Archie and Mr. Rivets were on their own. That's the end of chapter 2. Let me see if I can get a little bit of chapter 3 in here. Archie and Mr. Rivets took a carriage with his parents to the Palisades Airship Park, where the family airship was anchored. The Hesperus was small as far as an airship went, a family-sized aero yacht that had been in the Dent family for at least 2 generations. Unlike the huge whale-shaped airships that crossed the continent, the Hesperus was a small cone-shaped metal capsule with steam-driven propellers. They have a drawing of it here. I don't know if you can see it. Maybe you can get this book at your library. Okay. Suspended from a net full of hydrogen balloons. The Hesperus had been painted bright yellow to match its namesake's star's brilliant evening glow, but decades of sun and use had scratched and faded her. The cockpit and cabin were all one room, with the ship's controls and windshield at one end, and basic kitchen, bathroom, and sleeping facilities ringing the rest of the inner wall. Archie's father stood at one end of the round room, his mother at the other by the controls. Without a word, she weighed anchor and stoked the airship's steam propellers. New Rome slid by through the windshield as the Hesperus rose into the clouds and turned south. To go anywhere in the Hesperus, Archie's parents usually installed Mr. Rivets' airship pilot card and had him do the navigating. Whatever the bug thing controlling them was, it apparently knew how to fly an airship. Archie installed Mr. Rivets' pilot card anyway, so he could tell where they were going. "Florida," Mr. Rivets told Archie. "That would be the terminus of the flight path your parents have set, unless they mean to take us to the New Spain or Brazil." "Florida, where the Malachar Ahasuerus is buried," Archie said. Malachar Ahasuerus was the Mangleborn that Archie's parents had gone to warn the September Society about. The Swarm Queen, isn't that what they called it? Yes, sir, Mr. Rivets said. He and Archie were whispering, but it hardly mattered. Mr. and Mrs. Dent acted like the machine man and their son weren't even there. Malachar Hasheret is imprisoned in the swamps at the end of the peninsula, and as her name suggests, the Swarm Queen is master over the insect kingdom. Archie watched the bug thing on his mother's neck throb. It couldn't be a coincidence. A Mangleborn with a thing for insects, and now his parents and the rest of the Septemberists had bugs on their necks, telling them what to say and do. Wait, maybe not all the Septemberists, just the ones back at the headquarters. Uncle John, Archie said. John Douglas. He was another Septemberist, one who wasn't on the council. He wasn't Archie's real uncle. Archie didn't have any aunts or uncles, but his parents had always called him Uncle John. He came to visit the Dents at their home in Philadelphia a couple of times each year. In all the worry over his parents, Archie had forgotten him. Mr. Rivets, we have to get in touch with Uncle John. Oops. There's a page missing, I think. There's a page missing. Oh, no, there's not. It's stuck together. Uncle John. If he hasn't been to headquarters, he may not be under the Swarm Queen's control. He could help us. He might indeed, Master Archie, but how to reach him? We would have to land the Hesperus to send a letter by pneumatic post. Your parents have been docile until now, but I worry that their insect masters would make them do to you what their insect masters would make them do to you should we try to stop them. Archie couldn't believe he hadn't remembered him earlier, back in New Rome. This is so clinker, Mr. Rivets. We can't just sit here and do nothing. But nothing was all they could do now. Archie climbed into his hammock, which hung at eye level in an alcove off the Hesperus round cabin, and watched his parents from underneath his blanket. They never moved, never spoke, never ate or slept. They just stood there, staring straight ahead and smiling, while the Hesperus propellers drove them all south at full steam. As day turned to night, Archie realized it had been breakfast since he'd had something to eat. As scared as he was to come out from under his blanket again, he forced himself to cross the cabin and search the compartments in the airship's small galley. I'm afraid you won't find much, Master Archie, Mr. Rivets told him. They were over Cherokee territory now, and the machine man was paying close attention to Mrs. Dent at the controls. Your parents thought we would be back in Philadelphia by now. So had Archie. He remembered the sub-landing where he'd wished he could go off on a trip around the United Nations. He'd forgotten his wish, he realized. Just not the way he had imagined it. He had gotten his wish. Sorry, he didn't forget his wish. He had gotten his wish. Archie found an old saltine tin in one of the cabinets in the galley and popped it open. But it didn't have crackers inside. It held an ether pistol. It was old from the look of it, like something from the pictures of the Pawnee Wars in Archie's history book. It was squat and round with a pointy fin on top like antique ray guns had. Archie had no idea if it still worked, but it seemed like the real thing. He looked up at his father. Mr. Dent was still staring straight ahead and smiling. Wherever his parents were taking them, he was sure he'd be safer with the ray gun than without it. As innocently as he could, Archie walked to his hammock with the ray gun tucked into his jacket. He was so nervous he almost tripped over his own feet, but at last he was to his hammock, where he hastily stuffed the ray gun under his blanket. "I think I'll just go to sleep now," he announced. He was still hungry, but he had to pretend it was food he'd found in the cabinet and not something else. "Very good, Master Archie. We should be in Florida by midday tomorrow. You'll want all of your energy then," Mr. Rivets said. All of his energy for what, he didn't say, because neither of them knew. Mr. Rivets was right. Archie needed to be ready for whatever was coming. He climbed into his hammock and pulled the blanket over his head, holding the ray gun close so he could see it in the half-light. He'd never used one before, but Professor Torque used one a lot in The Adventures of Professor Torque and his Amazing Steam Boy, his favorite dime novel. Somewhere there was supposed to be a switch that activated the aggregator. There, the ray gun vibrated and hummed. Archie hugged it to him, hoping his parents didn't hear. A big round gouge on the side of the ray gun showed where the pistol had collected enough ether to fire. It was slow, but it worked. Archie quickly shut it down, worried he might accidentally set the thing off. He didn't know exactly what he would do with it, but it made him feel better to have it. Archie stayed under the blanket, hugging the ether pistol close like a stuffed animal. He knew he needed to rest, but he was too anxious and too scared. How could he sleep with those things here in the airship with him? What if one of them crawled off his parents and came after him? He would have to stay awake all night just to be sure. As he slept, he dreamed. 15 minutes later, he was fast asleep. I forgot to tell you that part. As he slept, he dreamed. He wasn't in the airship anymore. He was in a dark, man-made cavern with rock walls and a stone ceiling supported with tall iron buttresses like the September Society headquarters, only bigger, much bigger, but maybe built by the same people. At the center of the room, low to the ground, was a circular stone wall like the top of a well, but much larger, almost the size of the center circle on a lacrosse field. Kashoom! White-blue lightning flashed down from a metal rod sticking out of the ceiling and arched into the well, lighting up the chamber. In the flash from the lightning, Archie saw a vast clockwork machine set into the far wall of the cavern. But that wasn't what drew his attention. The floor was alive. The ground was covered with bugs, a 6-inch layer of them, all climbing and crawling on top of each other. Centipedes and beetles and mantises and roaches and 1,000 more creepy crawly things. 1,000,000 more. It was a jungle full of bugs, right here in this room, all around him. Archie jumped back in horror, but these bugs weren't crawling on him, and they didn't crunch when he stepped on them. He was there, but not there, like a ghost. The insects scrambled and chittered and buzzed through him, marching along with the rest of their creepy crawly friends toward the low wall of the stone circle where they climbed up and over. Archie wanted to see what was down in that hole. He needed to. He could feel the pull of it, just like the insects. He couldn't resist it. He slid a foot forward, still afraid of the bugs, but they passed right through him. Archie crept closer and closer to where the insects poured over the wall, then peeked over. The abyss was covered with an enormous stone like a lid. No, 2 stones, half circles that met in the middle, each one with a huge letter X on it. XX. It was a door, a seal, an old one with cracks in the stone. That's where the bugs were going. They wiggled and pushed and scrunched down through the cracks to whatever was below. Thoom! The ground trembled. Was it an earthquake? Thoom! Dust and rumble shook loose from the ceiling. Thoom! The stone seal on the well shuddered, knocking insects onto their backs. There was something inside the well, underneath the stone seals. Something trying to get out. Kashoom! Lightning flashed again. Archie woke up with a start on the Hesperus, the antique ray gun poking him in the stomach. The Mangleborn wakes, his father said, making Archie jump. His mother and father were both staring at him. I'm glad you were able to sleep, said Mr. Rivets. Archie felt like he'd been asleep for hours, but it was still dark outside. Mr. Rivets said they wouldn't get to Florida until midday. Thunder boomed outside, and the Hesperus shook and rattled. Rain spattered and the windshield, and Archie understood. It was morning. The Hesperus was just in the middle of a thunderstorm. So much for staying awake all night. Archie put a hand on the back of his neck just to check, but there was nothing there. It's like, do I have a bug? No. He slid out of the hammock. The ether pistol stuck in the belt of his trousers under his shirt tail. Through the windshield he saw the center of the storm dead ahead. Dark clouds swirled and lightning flashed, blue-white lightning, and suddenly Archie remembered his dream. Saw the cavern and the clockworks and the stone seal and the bugs. Ahead of them, deep in the storm, the lightning flashed again and again, all striking the same place, the tip of a metal tower poking up through the clouds. I do believe, said Mr. Rivets, we had arrived at our final destination. Okay, I'm going to put a bookmark in here because that's the end of chapter 3, but I will let you see if you can look at the picture of the ray gun at the beginning of chapter 4. Gotta have ray guns, I like it. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed chapter 4 of The League of Seven by Alan Grantz, and I will get back to it as soon as I possibly can, sooner than last time, I hope. Okay, you all have a wonderful day, and keep reading. I mean it.